and potential conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I'm joined now from Washington by Michael Kimmage, former US State Department policy planner for Russia and Ukraine. Mr. Kimmage, thank you so much again for joining us here on the program. You know, we spoke at the beginning of this month and you laid out some scenarios for me. One was that diplomacy would prevail and one of the others was that there would be potential all-out war. I just want to get a sense from you where your thinking is now, given where we are in this crisis.
Well, it's clear what we think of as conventional diplomacy has failed. French President Emmanuel Macron spent considerable capital going to Moscow and was effectively humiliated by Putin. So I think that road has come to an end. There will be no summit between President Biden and Putin, and Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Lavrov will not be meeting this week. I think it's really over, full stop, period. I don't think that means that there'll necessarily be all-out war, but I would be very surprised if Putin were to stop merely with the recognition of these two people's republics. I think there will be a wider military phase, but the scope of that, of course, is quite difficult at the moment to predict.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, in your view and based on the intelligence that's around, that it is worth it for him to march towards Kiev?
Perhaps. I think that he needs, in his estimation, to change the fundamental calculus in Ukraine. He needs to reorient the country from its Western affiliations toward neutrality. And he may have even larger ambitions than that, as suggested by his recent speech in Moscow, a kind of reconstitution of the Russian lands. And I don't think that that's achievable through a small-scale military incursion. If he's serious about that, it would mean an assault on the capital city.
I mean, is Putin stoppable? Were there things that the West could have done? And I know that Joe Biden tried to put on a sort of, a unified front with NATO and Western allies, but clearly that hasn't worked. What other tactic could have been used?
I think that the tactic that could have stopped Putin is one that the West was not willing to accept, and this would be the provision of air power and major troop deployments from the United States and other European countries to the territory of Ukraine. I think that would have deterred Putin, or could have deterred Putin, but anything short of that gives him military free rein in a country over which he enjoys a very considerable military dominance or superiority. So the stakes are unfortunately very high on both sides, but in the absence of a bona fide military commitment from the West, Ukraine is largely on its own.
Do you think part of the issue was that somehow Ukraine had been turned into some kind of red line without kind of having the leverage that you're talking about? And really the red line should have been NATO and countries who are part of NATO?
Well, the history will be argued over for a very long time in terms of the policies that the West could have taken to avoid this situation. Let me simply say, in terms of a red line, that Putin has been relatively clear over the years about Ukraine as an important red line of Russian foreign policy. He objected very much to the 2008 statement that Ukraine would one day be a member of the NATO alliance. He sort of repeated those convictions. It came in a much more extreme form in his speech from yesterday from the Kremlin, but that Ukraine is a red line and that he is willing to use military force to alter its direction is something that he's been saying for quite a while.
Yeah, and that's why I find it quite astonishing when analysts sort of talk about we're not quite sure what he's thinking. In 2008, he punished Georgia for that. In 2014, he punished Ukraine for it. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. And he's made it very clear in multiple op-eds, for example, one he wrote, a 5,000-word one he wrote in July of last year. So it's quite extraordinary that the West sort of behaves like it's caught by surprise.
I think that that's largely true. On the other hand, to sort of flip your question around, what Putin is contemplating, a major invasion of a country of some 40 million people, one of the largest countries in Europe, is unbelievably risky for Putin. So that he's had this in his mind, I think we've all known for a long time, that he would actually act on these aspirations and take the risks involved with his own population, with his own military, the financial risks that come with this venture. I continue to think of that as quite surprising. The ambition has been there, but the will to act on it looks quite new at the moment. And
just very briefly, we've got about 30 seconds to go. Do you think it's his age and where he's at? I mean, he's been at it for 22 years now.
Yes, I think this, if he achieves in his terms, would be his legacy, not losing Ukraine, but reclaiming it for Mother Russia.
Michael Kimmage, fascinating talking to you again. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you for having me.